Hello, I'm Sonali Krishna, and I welcome you to our special dialogue series, Savlon Swasth India Mission presents Hygiene Sahi, to Health Sahi, partnered by Times Network. The pandemic has brought into sharp focus the fact that collective health of the nation is rooted in everyday citizens taking responsibility for their individual hygiene. But has public health in India truly transformed post-pandemic? And do these efforts percolate down to the last mile? Essentially, how can we push the boundaries of hygiene across rural India by making accessibility and affordability mainstream? Well, today I'm in conversation with a highly distinguished panel to tackle this very topic. Please allow me to introduce my guests. We have with us today Prabhakar L, Executive Vice President and Head Social Investments ITC, Dr. K. Madan Gopal, Senior Consultant Health, Niti Aayog, Piyush Pandey, Padma Shri Awardee and Chairman of Global Creative and Executive Chairman India, Ogilvy, and Dr. Rani Bang, Padma Shri Awardee and co-founder SEARCH, which is Society for Education, Action and Research in Community Health. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Truly a pleasure having you with us. Let me start with you, Dr. Rani. The most vulnerable of communities often face considerable challenges when it comes to adopting hygienic habits. Where do the biggest bottlenecks lie, and what are the India-specific challenges or barriers we face with respect to becoming a healthier Bharat?
So, where is the bottleneck? What are the deficiencies? I personally feel that there are two deficiencies. One is knowledge deficiency, and second is resource deficiency. The whole scientific knowledge has not yet reached the rural and tribal area. Their perceptions about hygiene are based on their traditions and culture. This germ theory is totally, they are not aware of it. So the science of germs, how many bacteria we harbor in our hands, in our skin, people don't have much knowledge about it. These all scientific interventions have been 200 years old, but still they have not yet reached the rural population. So I personally feel that this scientific knowledge has to reach the rural people, tribal people. That is one gap. Second gap is the resource and facility mobilization. Unless we have a running tap water, how can we expect a tribal or rural or a slum woman to wash her hands? That is impossible. But recently, the initiative of Government of India to construct toilets in rural areas and to provide tap water, I think these initiatives are very good. But even if we provide the resources, if we construct the toilet, because of the cultural and traditional knowledge gaps, many women, men may not use the toilets. So it needs a mass movement, educational movement. And I think media can play a definite role in that. And that's what we have been doing. So science must reach the villages, the facilities must reach the villages, and people should know how to and why to use those facilities.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for those very pointed response. Let me take it to you, Dr. Gopal. What role has the pandemic played in bringing not just innovation, but accessible hygiene solutions to the forefront in rural India?
Sonali, it's very interesting question, because if you look when the pandemic was declared, there was no treatment available. Everybody was caught unaware that what to do. But one of the things which was highlighted is that you should be having your hand hygiene and the respiratory hygiene, because that's the way where the virus can enter the body. If somebody has done a study, what was the hand washing practices and the respiratory ethics before the pandemic and now, at least there has been a dramatic shift towards the adoption of this right from the rural areas to other areas. That's a major shift which has happened. Pandemic has definitely played a role, and it has at least made a dent into our understanding that this hand hygiene, the respiratory ethics, and the other measures which are required for prevention of the contagious disease are of paramount importance. Even if we don't know the etiology of the disease, but if you know how the disease can enter into the body and what practices which we can make, that kind of understanding has come in, and it has been one of the most highlights of this pandemic.
Absolutely, point well taken. Let me take it to India's favorite ad man, most celebrated ad man, Piyush. Piyush, while innovation can help crush cost barriers, how can we tap into our history, culture, and prevailing traditions to seamlessly integrate, hygienic habits and behavior change in our everyday community life?
So, behavior pattern has to be changed. But the good thing is, behavior resides in tradition. You have to introduce something into the tradition. And that is the best way of doing it. I think Savlon Swasth was one way of doing it. One of the efforts that the country can make in many, many ways. And number two, and the most important thing is, do not be in a hurry. These are behavior patterns of thousands of years. You have to be persistent. You have to keep at it. It will take its time. The problem with most communication in these things is they're sporadic. Sporadic doesn't help you change behavior. We have to be at it.
Fair enough. Let me take it to you, Prabhakar. Socioeconomically disadvantaged communities often lack access to basic resources, including, let's say, safe sanitation and clean water. What can organizations do to address this?
It's a journey. And that is where corporates like ITC can play a big role. And when you look at ITC's efforts, which are more integrated and sustained over a period of time, when I say integrated, it's not just on health and hygiene. You also focus on sanitation. You also focus on waste management, because all of them together eventually have an impact. It's not so much the need to inculcate scientific awareness, but it's important for people to understand the why of it. About a few months back, I was in Mysore and I was talking to a farmer couple, and they were saying that their habits have changed because their child came and shared something that the child picked up in the school. And as a farmer, why did you change? He narrated a very simple one-liner. He said, the child told me that if you don't follow these habits, you are likely to fall sick. And if you fall sick, who will take care of us? He said that is where the penny dropped. And slowly the behavior started changing. So this is what I call as an eye-to-eye journey. It's not so much the ignorance, it's actually indifference. And how do you move an individual from indifference to a stage where the individual becomes an influencer? And there are two intermittent stages where he needs to be a seeker and then a practitioner before he or she becomes an influencer. It is when the person moves to a seeker stage is where the access really comes into play. And based on ITC experiences, what I've realized, there are 4 types of access that one needs to work on. The first is the quality, meaningful infrastructure access. Like what Dr. Bang mentioned, it's about toilets. Now, what use of toilets if there is no running water facilities? So our focus has been on toilets or wash facilities where there is running water. The second access that we really need to work on is products and services. And that is where, like what Piyush mentioned, whether it's the Savlon Healthy Chalk or the Savlon Water Hand Wash, these are innovative products. But these products need to be perceived as value for money. And that is where there is tremendous scope for innovation. The third axis that becomes very, very critical is a trusted conversation platform and trusted customized advisors. Very often, that is where the big challenge is, and not much focus is given on creating those conversation platforms. They tend to be more of one-way communication. And the last access, I would say, is access to credible human impact stories. When there is access to those type of stories, it sort of speeds up the entire process of influencing and also ensuring that behavior that people have started, they continue.
Dr. Rani, you first began working with the tribal and rural women of Gadchiroli over 30 years ago. Within this community, what degree of changes have you witnessed when it comes to both access to hygiene and, of course, general awareness around health and hygiene?
Gadchiroli has got both the components, rural and tribal villages. So 35 years ago, when we used to go to rural area, we used to see men, women defecating on either side of the road. And they would stand up whenever some vehicle or some person went. And it used to be so embarrassing, both for them and for people like us. But now I see that definitely, though it has not completely vanished, it has definitely reduced. That consciousness is there in the rural area. So that is one change, positive change I see. And this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which our Prime Minister started, I think that has made a great impact in rural area. Another positive change I find is 30 years ago, we did a community-based study of gynecological problems. And to my surprise, I found that nearly 50% of women had reproductive tract infections due to different reasons, maybe because of lack of menstrual hygiene or because of safe abortion services or facilities for aseptic deliveries and all that. But over these years, now I see that the incidence of reproductive tract infections has definitely gone down. And there is an awareness amongst women. They seek care earlier and the incidence has gone down. And I think that it's because of both the factors, external factor like reduced defecation near the roads and contamination of water. And secondly, this provision of toilets. And in many villages now tap water is being made available. And with educational facilities available to the rural people now. And because of access to media, there is a mobile in every rural and tribal area. So they can access.
Point noted. And hopefully the audience is also hearing this. Question to you, Piyush. Communication has always played an integral role in shaping attitudes and inculcating behavioral changes. In fact, you yourself have been part of several such campaigns. What do you think needs to change in the way we communicate to make adoption of hygiene habits more relatable and also more persuasive?
Make the communication receiver friendly. That's what we do in advertising. We are supposed to make strategies into ways of saying that people can associate, engage, and follow. Same applies. Know your audience is number one principle in life. If we know our audience, we will know how simply to communicate, how memorably to communicate to them to have an impact. So be human in your communication. Don't be a doctor. Don't be a sarkar. Don't be an advertising man. Be a person who wants to share and make them understand and appreciate what you share. As simple as that, Sonali. There is no rocket science. Let's be human.
Beautiful. Let me ask you, Prabhakar, to create long-term change in any context, a community buy-in becomes critical. How can and should one involve the community to drive and sustain behavioral change?
I think communities is the bedrock for any change. And many a times we think you cannot create a community and we look at community in a very, very narrow sense. Let me give an example. So when we work in the schools and we sort of provide toilets or any other child-friendly infrastructure, typically you have the parent-teacher association as a community, but it has a limited purpose. What we have realized is if it is for the children, how do you involve them? So our experiments in terms of creating a child cabinet, where children sort of take responsibility. that becomes a very, very powerful intervention to sustain whatever one is looking at. And a similar thing we have seen, whether in terms of schools, where you look at school development management committees, or when you're looking at waste management, how do you create the ward committees or the mohalla committees? Now, what purposes this communities serve? I think the first and foremost is they take responsibility. What good it is if I construct a toilet with all the other facilities, but there's nobody who takes responsibility for maintaining it. It goes back down the drain after 2 years or 3 years, and the cycle again has to start. So the foremost is transferring the responsibility and accountability. And that's where you create an ownership and buy. The second important benefit one has seen of this type of communities for a change initiative is it's again a platform for conversations. Because when you have a group of people, you sort of then engage, discuss, share experiences, and that again sort of creates a manthan and more thoughts and other aspects come in. So that community is at the core of a change, which will ensure that there is equitable use of all the resources that are provided or are at the disposal, and create a governance mechanism which sustains it for years.
Thanks, Prabhakar. Children are generally the prime change agents when it comes to adoption of new habits within the family. Dr. Rani, how can we leverage this fact to make them hygiene champions within their communities?
There are only two barriers to this, and I think those should be properly addressed. One is the curriculum in the schools should include more scientific knowledge and practical knowledge about the relationship between hygiene and health. That one is still lacking in our curriculum. And secondly, we should look at these young people or the children as potential change makers through one generation. That is very important.
I have a very simple thing to say to everyone who's watching your program, authorities who might be watching this program, to everyone on this panel. When you have a baby, for 18 years at least, you educate the baby before the baby becomes a woman or a man who can stand up on their own feet independently. Give hygiene education, not 18, give them 16 years of consistent attention. That is how you bring about a behavior change. Then a child understands. And a wonderful thing that was said by Rani, I didn't agree with the scientific bit. I agreed with the practical bit. When you explain the practical bit, then that practical bit, the child is able to make the mother or the parents or the rest of the family understand. So teach them practically, teach them interestingly, give them beautiful little stories that are lovely to share. Thing will spread. And as I said, please give this movement at least 17, if not 18 years, like you give it to your child.
Thanks, Piyush. Last question, my dear panelists, before I let you go. Ultimately, is rural hygiene an individual responsibility, or rather does it require collective community approach? Dr. Gopal, I'll let you go first.
We have to make it a Jan Andolan to make it successful. Individual responsibility is of the prime importance, because 17, 18 years, you are teaching your child about the hygiene and the hygiene practices. And that is a very, very big deterrent for behavioral change. If he has not learned during these 17 years, it is very, very difficult to break that barrier which has been created. We have made attempts in the form of committees and other things, but the individual practices, the individual bringing, which has come into his practice, is very, very, very difficult to break. So you have to focus on that so that the collective action is happening and it becomes a Jan Andolan so that the hygiene and other practices happens.
Dr. Rani?
I think that it's the responsibility of both individual as well as the community. And instead of talking about very grand ideas, I want to specifically focus on provision of scientific knowledge to the community about hygiene. Secondly, changing the social and personal hygienic practices, providing the resources like running tap water and toilets, how to use the toilets, what is the benefit of the toilet. And fourthly, I think Corona has created havoc all over the world, but it has been a sort of boon in disguise. And epidemics like Corona have suddenly sensitized not only the educated, but also the uneducated, rural, tribal people about the importance of hygiene, about the importance of hand washing, importance of using the mask and all that. So this sort of epidemics should become a focal point for spreading more and more knowledge about the infections, how they are transmitted. And yes, these infections can be prevented. And we have definitely showed it very positively that on one hand, immunization coverage is very important. On the other hand, personal hygiene, personal mask use and all that is very important. Social distancing is very important because crowding is the major factor in rural areas and urban slums. So I think it has been a boon in disguise, and government has definitely done a good thing about it.
Thanks, Dr. Rani. What about you, Prabhakar? Individual or community?
Yeah, it's not a question of or, it's both individual and community, both go together hand in hand. Because at the end of the day, the individual is staying in a community and it has to sort of be both happening together.
And closing words from you, Piyush, before I let all of you go.
I think, I believe, identify the individuals who attract communities, who develop communities. It will start with individuals. Individuals will spread the message, communities will get formed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those, pearls of wisdom from all of you. Thank you, lady and gentlemen. And with that, our special feature, Savlon Swasth India Mission presents Hygiene Sahi to Health Sahi, partnered by the Times Network, comes to a close. We trust you found the insights shared of value. Do chime in with your thoughts by staying connected with us on social media using the hashtag Hygiene Sahi to Health Sahi. Thank you so much for watching.